The topic is pre-prosthetic surgery. The starting point is the tooth extraction or extraction of multiple teeth, resulting in the beginning of gradual changes in the shape, height, and width of the alveolar ridges, which in turn influence the soft tissue attachments. ऐसे ले लेंगे. By definition, pre-prosthetic surgery is carried out to reform, redesign soft and hard tissues by eliminating biological hindrances to receive comfortable and stable prosthesis. Reform and redesign denture bearing area to create an oral environment to support a functional prosthetic appliance. What comprises denture bearing area? That is very important to know. Denture bearing area in both maxilla and mandible. There are soft tissue and hard tissues which are considered in denture bearing area. In maxilla, it is alveolar ridges, labial and buccal vestibule, palatal vault, frenal muscle attachments, maxillary tuberosity, nasal and maxillary sinus floor. While in mandible, it comprises mandibular alveolar ridges, labial, lingual vestibule, retromolar area, mylohyoid ridges, frenal muscle attachments, genial tubercles, mental nerve. Now we should also learn as to what are the causes of bone loss. There are various causes apart from the extraction of the tooth. There are metabolic factors, for example, osteoporosis or osteomalacia. Aging is a very important factor that is causing continuous alveolar resorption or maxillary sinus pneumatization. Trauma is another factor which is not only caused by the extraction of teeth but also sometimes dentoalveolar fractures as a part of facial trauma. Then there are periodontal diseases which result in irregular pattern of bone loss. Then there are pressure areas which are caused by the dentition which is present in one arch which is pressing upon the edentulous ridge in the opposite arch. Disuse atrophy is also one of the causes. Now, what are the aims of pre-prosthetic surgery? Obviously, any patient who receives a denture would like to have a stable, retentive and a comfortable fit. So, our aim is to provide adequate bony support for the placement of complete or partial denture. That is, it should have optimum ridge, height, width and contour. Second is to provide soft tissue support and optimum vestibular depth. Elimination of pre-existing bony deformities like mandibular tori, prominent mylohyoid ridge, genial tubercles. Correction of maxillary and mandibular ridge relationships. Elimination of pre-existing soft tissue deformities such as epulis, flabby ridges, hyperplastic tissues, and then relocation of whether it is upper or lower frenal muscle attachments. The alveolar ridges are classified as follows into class 1 to class 6 modification. This is done by Cowwood and Howell. So class 1 is your dentate area, that is pre-extraction, while class 2 is immediate post-extraction. Class 3 to class 6 are the classes when alveolar ridges are beginning to undergo changes. So class 3 is convex ridge form with adequate height and width of alveolar process. Class 4 is knife edge form with adequate height but inadequate width of alveolar process. Class 5 is the flat ridge form with loss of alveolar process. Class 6 is going to be loss of basal bone that may be extensive but follows no predictable pattern. Modification to this classification that may be relevant to contemporary reconstructive methods include subclassifications, that is in class 2 and class 4. Class 2 will have no defect or buccal wall defect or multi-wall defect or deficiency, while class 6 can have marginal resection defect or continuity defect. The diagrammatic representation you can see in the top diagrams, there is symphysis area, the middle one is the parasymphysis area, and the bottom diagram is taken from the molar area as the cross section of the alveolar ridge. So that is, first one is pre-extraction followed by post-extraction time in symphysis area, where you can see slowly the ridge height and the width is gradually decreasing till it is reaching class 6. So same happens in parasymphysis area and molar area, where soon after the extraction is done, the alveolar ridge begins to undergo resorption, atrophy, and leaving a flat ridge with complete deficiency of bone. Coming to the classification, pre-prosthetic surgical procedures can be classified as basic procedures, that is, which can be carried out under local anesthesia. Advanced surgical procedures which may require hospitalization and require general anesthesia. Another way of classifying is that the procedures which are carried out, number one, for alveolar ridge correction or alveolar ridge extension and alveolar ridge augmentation. So this is actually the clinical classification which is going to guide us with regard to various pre-prosthetic surgical procedures. So now coming to the first type of procedures, that is the procedures which are directed towards the alveolar ridge correction. So basic idea of these procedures is to remove any hard tissue or soft tissue hindrances from the alveolar ridge. So these are either bony procedures or procedures which are carried out on the soft tissues. Bony surgeries are alveolectomy, alveoplasty, elimination of unfavorable undercuts, reduction of genial tubercles, reduction of mylohyoid ridge, excision of tori, maxillary tuberosity reduction, and removal of exostosis. The soft tissue surgeries will include removal of redundant crestal soft tissue, frenectomy, excision of epulis, and excision of palatal papillary hyperplasia. Now coming to the hard tissue procedures. The two very basic procedures are alveolectomy and alveoloplasty. One has to understand the difference between the two. When it is ended by TOMY, T-O-M-Y, that means there is removal of the bone. And when it is plasty, that means there is recontouring of the bone. So that is the basic difference between the two procedures. Both are done after the extraction of the teeth. So coming to the definition, alveolectomy, the surgical removal or trimming of alveolar process, that is termed as alveolectomy. Clinically, after extraction, whenever there is presence of sharp margins at the interdental, interseptal or labiobuccal alveolar crest, they should be trimmed with ronger or round burr and smoothened with bone file. Gross alveolectomy is indicated where the shape of the alveolar process is to be improved or where the alveolar bone prevents the accurate sitting of a denture. So now coming to the procedure, how is it performed? So now first thing is extraction of the tooth. So after the extraction of the tooth, you can see that this marginal gingiva is reflected little bit, following which the bone is smoothened with a round burr. It should be totally smooth so that there are no sharp edges, and then there is a primary closure with interrupted suturing is completed. Coming to alveoloplasty, as I discussed the difference In this procedure, there is only recontouring which is done, and the aim is to preserve the remaining bone as much as possible. Alveoloplasty and alveoplasty are one and the same thing, and the aim is to recontour the alveolar ridge for providing best possible tissue contour for denture support by maintaining as much bone and soft tissue as possible. Alveoloplasty is of two types: simple alveoloplasty, that is alveolar compression, or complex alveoloplasty. Coming to the clinical pictures of simple alveoloplasty. Now you see in the first clinical picture, multiple extractions have been carried out. So these are the remaining sockets. In the second is a mucoperiosteal flap has been reflected off the alveolar bone, and bone file has been used to smoothen the sharp edges. Just smoothing is being done, following which a digital compression is achieved of the buccal and the lingual cortices, following which the primary closure is done, and that is the post-operative healing of the alveolar ridge after simple alveoloplasty. Next. Coming to complex alveoloplasty, that is very important even for short note point of view or viva point of view. You have to divide that into Dean's intraseptal alveoloplasty, and second is Ovie-Gieser complex technique. Intraseptal alveoloplasty or the Dean's technique, important part here is to understand that it is always used in the maxilla, and second is that there is presence of gross maxillary overjet. Thoma in 1969 has changed the name of this technique from intraseptal to intercortical, as it is done in between the cortical plates rather than the septum. So first is used in anterior maxillary region. Second is it is used to reduce gross maxillary overjet, carried out immediately after extraction of anterior teeth. And then maintenance of periosteal attachment to the labial plate is very important. The important indication here is where adequate bone height exists, but an undercut is present on the buccal aspect. It has got the ability to reduce the buccal undercut or the labial prominence without significantly reducing the height of the alveolar ridge. So it maintains the height and it reduces the obliteration, the bony obliteration, carried out at the time of multiple teeth extraction or very, very early post extraction period. So this is the procedure. Coming to the A, that is the tooth to be extracted. Rather, because this is carried out after the extraction of multiple teeth, so you are looking at 6 teeth which are being extracted from central to canine on one side and central to canine on the other side. Once these extractions are carried out, these are the sockets. This is the buccal plate and that is the palatal region. Next procedure which should be done is to remove the interseptal septae which are in between the teeth. Following which 2 vertical releasing incisions are given in the buccal cortical plate, both the sides, only on the labial aspect. Then there are 2 instruments which could be either periosteal elevators or chisels which are inserted in the sockets and a green stick fracture of the buccal cortical plate is carried out. Once this is done, the fractured buccal plate is compressed digitally towards the palatal aspect. So not only we are reducing the buccal overjet here, but also the buccal and the lingual or buccal or the palatal plates are pushed together or compressed together. After that, the primary closure is carried out. The second type is Obwe-Geisser technique, that is Obwe-Geisser complex alveoloplasty. Now, if it is extreme premaxillary protrusion, then Obwe-Geisser technique is indicated because it allows the repositioning of both labial and palatal cortices. So you saw in Dean's technique, the cuts were given only in the labial plate, that is the vertical incisions, and only the green stick fracture of the labial plate was carried out. But in Obwe-Geisser technique, the vertical cuts are given not only in the labial plate but also in the palatal plate, so that both the cortices are fractured and then they are compressed together. So let us see the diagrammatic representation. So the first is the extraction part. The teeth are extracted, so you are looking at, say, central lateral canine on one side and central lateral canine on the other side. These are the empty sockets which are present. So once again, you will enter the socket. After cutting the interseptal bone, the inverted cone vulcanite burr is used to widen the socket here. They are widened, following which, now this is important point to note, that this is the releasing vertical cut in the palatal bone. So with the straight burr, vertical cuts are made bilaterally in both labial and palatal cortices mesial to canine socket. So that is the canine, that is the mesial aspect of the socket, and that is the vertical cut extending into the palate. Similarly on the opposite side. With a small disc, that is a disc, a horizontal cut, that is the horizontal cut which will be made at the base of all the sockets. So that means the horizontal cut is going to be here, like this. And a disc can be used for this purpose. After that, these are the two instruments. They can be broad elevators or maybe a chisel which is used, inserted at the base of the socket, and then the green stick fracture of both labial plate and the palatal plate is carried out. So that means the compression of the two plates can be done to a greater degree as compared to the Dean's technique, and that is why it can take care of extreme maxillary overjet. Alveoloplasty after post-extraction healing. So many a times the patients are going to report to you after the extractions have been carried out, maybe a few months ago or years ago, and then it is resulting in a very irregular ridge or knife edge ridge, or there are multiple areas which are having sharp bony spicules, which are not only painful to touch but are also to be removed as a part of pre-prosthetic surgery prior to the delivery of a prosthesis. So what is to be done here? Since there are no teeth, there are no sockets, now a crestal incision and a mucoperiosteal flap will be reflected. Care should be taken specially in the sharp areas so that the flap does not get torn while reflecting. After it is separated completely, Two releasing incisions should be given so that the proper reflection of the flap is done, following which sharp areas or the undercut should be trimmed carefully using bone rongers and then filed using the file, and suturing can be done primarily. That is a clinical picture where the mucoperiosteal flap has already been raised. You can see this. Now this is a sharp bone protuberance which is present little bit here also. So they can be removed using a bone ronger, following which a bone file can be used. So these are some diagrams to explain the same thing. First of all, using number 15 knife, a crestal incision is used and a mucoperiosteal flap has been reflected, showing the underneath bone. Using a bone file or maybe a file along with rongers is used to completely smoothen the ridge. You must understand that the bone file should only be used in one direction, not in both the direction, very similar to how you use a nail file. A primary closure is done with interrupted suture. Now just look at the morphology of the mandible. That is the lingual aspect. So these are the genial tubercles which are giving attachment to the genioglossus muscle. Also you can see mylohyoid ridges here. So genial tubercles, if you see in a dentate patient, it is quite far below in the lingual aspect. But what happens after the extraction of these teeth, the alveolar ridge undergoes resorption, so much so that the genial tubercles come to lie at the level of alveolar ridge. So definitely then they have to be removed and smoothened, and the muscle which is attached here has to be repositioned. So the genial tubercles are the bony attachments which become as an area of interference after the gross resorption of the mandibular ridge. So these genial tubercles, what they can do is they can dislodge the denture with slightest amount of tongue movement, and so the peripheral seal of the lingual aspect is lost. Next slide. How do we do that? A crestal incision again is given from say lower canine to canine area after infiltration of the local anesthetic. No reflection of the flap is done on the labial side, obviously because we need to carry out our procedure only on the lingual side. So very carefully the lingual flap is reflected. So a full thickness mucoperiosteal flap is reflected till you reach the level of genial tubercle. Now coming to the separation of the muscle attachments. So the genioglossus muscle which is attached should be removed with a sharp instrument, following which excision of the tubercle is carried out using a rotary instrument, and then it should be smoothened properly with a file, and this entire procedure is done under copious irrigation of saline. All the debris of the bone should be removed prior to the suturing. Coming to the reduction of the mylohyoid ridge, very similarly, after the resorption of the ridge, the mylohyoid ridge comes to lie very, very close to the alveolar ridge. The attachment of the mylohyoid muscle similarly can dislodge the denture, so it becomes a hindrance in the delivery of a good denture. The mylohyoid ridge is a radio-opaque ridge, that is the attachment for the mylohyoid muscle. The ridge runs downwards and forwards from third molar region to the area of premolars. So that is the mylohyoid ridge. Now this is a dentate patient, so the mylohyoid ridge is quite far below, and so it cannot cause any hindrance of the dislodgement of the denture, but the area from where the extractions have been done, you can see that it has come to lie quite close to the alveolar ridge. So now after a few months, if you have to give denture to this patient, say a partial denture, then this ridge and the muscle which is attached to this will cause dislodgement of the denture. The denture phalange should extend below this area, so the internal oblique ridge extends inferiorly from the coronoid process to the lingual alveolar margin of the molar teeth. Both the ridges become prominent and progressively higher on the mandible as resorption occurs. They should be reduced when one of the three conditions occur, that is, the mucoperiosteum becomes repeatedly traumatized and the relief is necessary to permit soft tissue closure. Second, in gross resorption of the mandible, the improved border seal is critical to retention. And third is to permit greater phalange extension for increasing the stability and retention of the denture. Procedure will be very similar in terms of that only the lingual flap is reflected here, because the mylohyoid ridge or internal oblique ridge are present on the lingual side. So a crestal incision in the posterior ridge area and the reflection of mucoperiosteal flap is done to expose the medial surface of the mandible at the mylohyoid ridge level. Now the tissue from the floor of the mouth and lingual mucoperiosteum is protected by inserting the blade of tongue depressor in between the flap and the bone. Now you can use osteotome or you can use a rotary instrument for the reduction of the mylohyoid ridge. After, very important is that you dissect the mylohyoid muscle fibers away from the mylohyoid ridge. Then the bone is smoothened using the bone file, and then primary closure can be achieved. So that is the diagrammatic representation. So that is the attachment of the mylohyoid muscle quite high on the ridge. That is the crestal incision which has been used to expose the bone and the mylohyoid ridge. After the mylohyoid muscle has been reflected away, the bone ronger has been used, and this instrument is used to keep this flap away from the bone, because this flap is containing important vital structures. And once that is done, you can use a bone file. That is a bone file which is moving on the medial surface on the mylohyoid ridge, and it smoothens it off. Most important structure here is the lingual nerve, mylohyoid nerve and associated vessels, which have to be prevented, and that is where the instrument edge is kept as a guard so that these structures can be preserved. Next procedure is carried out as excision of tori. So tori are either maxillary or the palatal tori, that is present in the vault of the palate midline, or mandibular tori which are present on the lingual aspects of the mandible. So what are tori basically? These are exostoses, overgrowth of cortico-cancellous bone and localized to a particular area, usually which is benign and asymptomatic and slow growing. The origin is not known. In maxilla it occurs in the midline of palate. In mandible it occurs on the lingual aspect of alveolar bone. They can be present bilaterally or unilaterally, can be multilobulated or unilobulated. What are the indications? If it is very big in size, that is extremely large tori filling the palatal vault, it should be removed. Second is these tori can cause ulceration, traumatization, hyperkeratinization of overlying mucosa, then they should be removed. They can become as a part of deep bony undercuts, interference with function, speech, deglutition processes. Psychological considerations, sometimes the patient gets worried about these swellings present and become cancer phobic. Food lodgement can also be present under the folds and projections of these tori. Interference with the posterior palatal seal of the denture, then they can cause, when the teeth are present, tori of no consequence and there are usually no speech problems associated with them. But after extraction, the upper denture construction or the lower denture construction is not possible until these tori are removed. The technique for excision of palatal tori, I'll show you the diagrammatic representation first so that it is easy to understand. So that is, these lobulated masses are the tori which are present in the palatal vault. So we have given a double Y shape incision in the center and two flaps, mucoperiosteal flaps are elevated. This is one flap and this is other flap. Once these two flaps are raised, now these are the tori which are completely exposed. Next thing which is very important is to remove these tori in pieces, not as one part, otherwise it can cause palatal perforation. So these tori are now divided into separate small parts and then each part is removed separately. After which the palatal area should be gently smoothened and then the primary closure will be carried out like with interrupted sutures. So this is a most important part, is to divide this lobulated conglomerated part into multiple parts to prevent the perforation of palatal vault. So coming to the technique, after bilateral greater palatine and incisive nerve block, that is your local anesthesia, you can give a Y-shape releasing incision at both the ends and then carefully reflect mucoperiosteal flaps separately on both the sides using periosteal elevator. Retraction sutures, as you saw in the diagrams, were applied so that the flaps are not damaged or traumatized while you are working on the tori. So the tori are excised as multiple pieces. So never be excised en masse. So divide these tori into multiple segments, and that you can do either vertically, horizontally, and then use a rotary burr, and after that each piece is removed separately under continuous irrigation of saline, following which you smoothen the palatal vault prior to using suturing for primary closure. A prefabricated acrylic splint should be prepared preoperatively so that once this flap is closed, you can put iodoform dressing and give the splint after doing the primary closure so that there is no collection of blood or hematoma underneath the flap. Possible complications which can be prevented, although intraoperatively bleeding can occur following injury to greater palatine vessels. Fracture of palatal shelf can be caused if you are not careful, And if there is perforation, then oronasal or oroantral fistula or communication may be caused. Post-operatively, hematoma formation, which we discussed, that can be prevented using a prefabricated splint. Sloughing and necrosis of palatal mucosa can happen but can be prevented if you are very careful in raising the flaps. Gaping or non-healing of the wound, and oroantral or oronasal fistula formation. Similarly, mandibular torus removal should also be carried out because they can cause the smooth seating of the denture. So we will see the diagrams first. So these are the mandibular tori which are present. They are quite prominent, which are present on the lingual aspect. That is the ridge, the mandibular ridge. So if you see, the height of the mandibular ridge and the mandibular tori almost are at the same level. So basically there is no place on the lingual aspect to accommodate the flange of the denture. So the first is a crustal incision and only the lingual mucoperiosteal flap reflection to show the tori, the mandibular tori. You can use a rotary burr to fragmentate this into small pieces and then finally remove it, and a primary closure using maybe a continuous suture. In this case, continuous locking suture will be better, which is going to take care of any dead space. So the incision over the alveolar ridge in the premolar area, lingual sulcus incision without releasing incision in the dentulous patient, then raise a mucoperiosteal flap only on the lingual aspect. Make a purchase or a point or a groove with a burr on the medial aspect of the torus parallel to the medial surface of the mandible from the base of the superior margin. Once this cleavage is done, then an osteotome can be placed in the groove for gentle excision of entire torus. Possible complications in case when you are removing mandibular tori, intraoperatively injury can be caused to submandibular salivary gland duct. Since floor is very vascular, excessive bleeding may be present from any of the branches of the lingual artery. Be careful. Laceration of the mylohyoid muscle should be prevented, and tearing of the flap while you are raising the flap. Post-operatively, life-threatening hemorrhage in the floor of the mouth has been reported. So it is a good idea sometimes to inpatient or admit this patient for monitoring so that the patient can be checked for any hemorrhage, hematoma or airway problem and discharged the next day. Infection should also be dealt with by using proper adequate antibiotic cover. Coming to the maxillary tuberosity reduction. So maxillary tuberosity can be quite bulbous in certain cases and that it needs reduction. So this excess can be in both horizontal and vertical directions and may interfere with denture construction. This excessive bony undercut, mobile or redundant soft tissue or hyperplastic fibrous tissue may be present. X-rays should always be taken prior to doing maxillary tuberosity reduction to determine the extent of bone and soft tissue in enlarged tuberosity, number one, and to see the level of the floor of the maxillary antrum. It is carried out under local anesthesia. So infiltration or posterior superior alveolar nerve block with greater palatine block should be given. Then crestal elliptical incision from tuberosity to premolar area should be given, and a mucoperiosteal flap is raised, and the section of the tissue between the elliptical incision is removed. So that is, we are talking about the excessive soft tissue which is present or which is going to be present after the tuberosity, the bony reduction. If the excess soft tissue is fibrous, hyperplastic, then the medial margin of the incision on both the sides are thinned out tangentially to remove the wedge of the excess fibrous tissue till the bony crest. If the excess tissue is primarily bone, then rest of the mucoperiosteum is reflected till the vestibular depth. Excess bone or buccal exostosis is then removed from the crest of the ridge and from the buccal plate. That is, if excessive undercut present. This can be accomplished using chisel, mallet or rotary instrument. So we are looking at very bulbous maxillary tuberosities here, bilateral. So that is the crestal incision and a full thickness mucoperiosteal flap has been raised. Now using a ronger, you can remove the excess tuberosity exostosis, and then using a file smoothen the area out. Now if this mucoperiosteum is excess, then a wedge is removed prior to closure. The primary closure is carried out using your continuous suture. So that is the cross section. So this is the soft tissue on both the sides, and this is the excess soft tissue which can be removed prior to the closure if necessary, and then the primary closure is carried out. Complications. Most important structure here is the maxillary antrum. So perforation of the maxillary antrum should be prevented prior to tuberosity reduction, and as we discussed, proper imaging should be carried out to see what is the level of the maxillary antrum and how much redundant soft tissue is present over the excess tuberosity region. So now the soft tissue procedures will be carried out, and that we are going to discuss in the next part. Thank you.